I'm going to kick some things off, but amazingly, we have Catherine Featherstone, Stin,
Yep.
joining with us from the Green Building Council of Australia. It's fantastic to have you in good old Adelaide, Catherine. And we're going to basically just start and go down the line. Now, um, Catherine, the other reason why we're so um, excited, I guess, to have you on the panel, not just because you have some fantastic shoes, you can on those stuff, is actually because you have a wealth of experience in the built environment industry across many different kind of disciplines. But especially now that you're in the Green Building Council of Australia, a lot of advocacy, a lot of trying to get the industry to aim higher. It's recognized that circularity and embodied carbon are like hot topics. So could you please give us some insight on how you've seen things evolve in the material space through your experience, and then also to make sure that it feels special that you're in Adelaide, could you take us behind a little bit of the curtain on some recent industry developments in this space and what might be to come?
Yep. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. Can everyone hear me? Yep, you're good. Okay. I'll try to speak up a little bit as well. My 11-year-old thinks I shout plenty, so sorry.
Mom voice, please.
Mum voice. So we're obviously involved a lot in upfront carbon. In fact, we've just released a guide on the practical guide to upfront carbon, which supports the technical guide that was released in September last year. So you'll see those documents now up and accessible on the GBCA website. And obviously, I don't need to tell you that what we're trying to do in the upfront carbon space, so cradle to gate, is really address, whereas previously we've addressed operational carbon up until this point, by 2050, the buildings that we're creating now are going to be contributing to 85% of the carbon, the building emissions carbon. So we're currently, buildings dominate. They equate to about 40% of carbon emissions currently, globally. So it's important because the stuff that we do now really matters. So that guide looks at taking you right through from feasibility to construction phase and handover, and I highly recommend it. It's a great guide, and it sort of ties in neatly with circularity and with products and materials, which is where I function at the GBCA. So with materials, we're seeing that not only is cost is still the number one factor. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. But other factors are coming in, and they're becoming more important to procurers and to specifiers. We're seeing groups like Architects Declare, who Dave mentioned earlier, who are coming up with a survey to go out to their suppliers to look at some of the key focus areas for them. And as it happens, we're aligned. So we're developing a responsible products guideline for product certification schemes to align their schemes and their strategies and their standards around, to start to set out strategy both now and then sort of 5 to 10 years time for what products in the built environment will be. So Dave mentioned Declare. Declare is a product certification scheme that's recognised by the guidelines. It's one of many. I'm really excited. It's going to be released in September, alongside a calculator which will help to calculate sort of more holistic points of what a responsible product is in the built environment. So we know as well products like Shore Contract and the flooring industry have come leaps and bounds with and are really dominating the space when it comes to reusability and circularity. But there are some really great other schemes that are happening and individual manufacturers. But what we're finding is that it's really ad hoc at the moment. People are doing some great stuff in lots of disparate fields, and the GBCA is really keen to be able to pull it all together and come up with a strategy that sort of at least fits most people. So we will take the laggards in the industry and set them along a strategy or a pathway to what makes sense for products, as well as rewarding some of the real high performers in the space. And the kinds of products that we are seeing now are kinds of products that, for example, there's a supplier in Sydney who is taking out cabinetry from office fit outs and stripping it and chipping it and turning it back into new cabinetry. So then we've got that highest best use. And that fits in really well with a lot of the fit out space, which I'm incredibly passionate about as well. Sorry, I'll shut up in a second. But this is really where you can see circularity, you can see responsible products doing what they need to do, because 30% of those products that we used in the built environment are actually in fit outs. And we all here know what that churn is like. It's, you know, it has been traditionally every 5 years. The way that we work collectively needs to change so that we can write those lease agreements properly, so that we can have the right people in the room at the right time, and we can change those procedures so that we're wasting less.
Well, thank you so much for that update. Would you like to ask the next question?
Yes, but I don't have a clue. Thanks. Ooh, you can't drink that. James.
Yes.
How did it feel to work on such prominent adaptive reuse projects in Adelaide? And were there any good crap stories you can unveil? And upon reflection, do you think that there were some aspects you think could have been dealt with better?
Yeah, so I guess the first one of that
Thank you.
part 3 question. But the first bit, great privilege to work on that project and excitement. But I guess there was also a lot of responsibility, I guess, involved in that, because it's you make a mistake or do it wrong, everyone will see that and remember that. And I don't want to be known for that. But excitement because, you know, it was a building, and I've talked to a few people just after in the break just before, and I said, sustainability, I think we're all here because, you know, we're all aligned in some way or another, but another focus for me is that social sustainability and the wellness side. So turning it from an environment where people are getting there to get better, but not an inviting place and a very private kind of exclusive space unless you're there because you're sick, into a place of reinvention and kind of discovery. And social space for public to be involved was a huge thing for myself. So that was great. And also, I think because the bones, when you could look past some of the ugliness, was a lot of beauty already there. So I guess as an office and a studio, we really wanted to outline ourselves with that and bring that to the state. Crap stories, plenty on that site. I think
Give us the juicy content.
yeah, I think you kind of mentioned, like someone mentioned earlier, like you can have a lot of love and passion for a lot of projects, and you know, I could almost have as many tears on how many things went wrong or just discovered differently and late in the piece. So definitely things were unknown. The 2 different buildings, probably from Allied and to McEwen, had very different experiences, I guess. One was full of beauty that was mostly hidden and kind of could really just be brought out. I mean, you didn't have to do too much, like in the way of the bones were already there. One was, as I mentioned, kind of the poorer cousin, which had nothing internally, and from a heritage point of view, was unfortunately was just not there. So trying to take what we did have and bring it to life was great, but unfortunately hidden with asbestos and bits and pieces that just kept breaking it down. But I was mentioning, because that building was also covered in 3 sides by other buildings, we never knew exactly what we were dealing with until it was gone. And to the point with how quickly program times, I guess, always against us in no matter what industry we're at. But when they took the very northern building, which was huge, down, we didn't actually see the very end of our building until the last scaffold was done. It was almost handover. So on that, would I do things differently? I don't think I could control that, but I would have loved to seen more time taken into it from the client, from delivery of it, to really appreciate what the final product would be. I think we did a great job, and I think and the other companies that have been around and done it as well have done a great job in in bringing it back to life. And the environment is amazing now, in my opinion. Like, is it is there no flaws? No, but I think where it's come is amazing. But I would have loved personally, even listening to now a bit more, the material use, I think, would have been something I would have pushed on. Mentioned back then it was more making sure we get the basics of, sustainability right. But now going, I really wish we thought about materials a little bit more. I'm not saying we didn't, but that next level of that longevity, that cradle to cradle, like not really as taken as deep, and maybe that's just a personal thing, but I've definitely come a long way. But we are talking 5 years ago from the start of some of these projects, and where I think we've come as an industry in 5 years is pretty amazing. And I think some people say even in the last 2 years, since COVID, is a big difference. So yeah, and it's a million little things inside that as well. But that's probably a big thing. Probably education for everyone is probably the big thing.
You need to reference that.
I think
I was going to say, has everyone actually gone into some of the, they're publicly accessible? Go and have a look at the Lot 14 heritage buildings.
Yeah.
Go into Allied, different name now, I think, but Allied Health. Go into the spaces, walk in, see how they're being used. It's absolutely fantastic what they've done with those areas. So yeah, I can't.
On that, I think the big thing is sometimes we go to design something and we can think it's going to be the most amazing thing, but it's how people use the space afterwards that really proves whether in my opinion, you did your job well or not. It doesn't have to be the most award-winning project to be the best building, in my opinion. Like, if people use it well, people enjoy the space, and they can be in that space and do what they want and function properly, and then do the sustainability on top of that, and it all comes together, then you've done a great thing. And that's where I think the success has been in the site. Unfortunately, with the client, sometimes not knowing the tenant until late means we did have to do a bit of rework, which I would have preferred not to have done, because unfortunately you're stripping out some stuff that you just spent time putting in, and the energy and everything involved in that is unfortunate, but that's also, it was kept to a minimum. There was boundaries. So yeah, I guess my question just relates to Dave here, just asking about flooring companies and manufacturers seem to have come a huge way in the journey, and most other ones also into the journey of cradle to cradle. What do you think is the tipping point for other industries to join, to come to align with this?
I think two things. One is it's got to be a holistic approach, not just to look at one side. Kat mentioned earlier the steps that the Green Building Council are taking in being able to go into a product calculator. And I have absolutely no reservation in saying that Catherine has changed the Green Building Council from a products perspective. It's been a tremendous journey and a pleasure to work with. I think in an easier way to ask that or to answer that question is, when you select product, look at everything through everything that the company offers. Don't just look at one side of it. There is so many 15 certifications now, certification schemes.
More, yeah.
Don't just look at the certificate. Look at the holistic approach, and hold people accountable for those stewardship schemes. That's my biggest bugbear. Probably the biggest challenge we face. I mean, I make a living, and my team make a living on selling more floor coverings. What we're trying to encourage is ways to keep them on the floor longer and to get them back at the end of their life cycle. I mean, I'd love to sell the same amount but less frequently. Let's look at things holistically, and the thing that challenges that the most is that beautiful word VE. When that comes along, is it's got to be apples with apples comparisons. I like to look at product certification and circularity a little bit like modern slavery. Don't punish those who aren't doing it. Bring them along the journey, because it's important for us all to be in it. And I talk about earlier 46 different suppliers just in my product. I think furniture's triple that. How many of those are actually holding true to those certification schemes? So I would say, in answer to the question, is how do we bring people along? Is the journey. Don't punish them. Make sure that they do better. And again, talk on modern slavery. We bought a factory in California that was in contravention of Modern Slavery Acts because we were underpaying female staff. We didn't shut the factory or stop people being employed as we made those changes. And so change those through the supply chain. You should be no different with regards to product. Bring people along the journey because, hey, we're a nearly $8 billion US organization. There's a lot of folk making money in Australia as small importers, and they deserve a right to do that. Level the playing fields, get them up to speed, because we can afford to pay the fees for certifications and stewardship schemes. Some of them can't. Let's not shut them down. Bring them on the journey. I think it's an important bit.
Love it. I'm gonna ask the next question. Would you like that?
No, I can see it from there.
All right.
Got
great.
glasses on today. And I think, yeah, and it's one I would have asked without your prompting is tell us about the journey in writing the action plan as question one, and some surprising outcomes that came from that.
Yep. All right. Varying levels of enjoyment throughout the project, like any project. But I think probably the biggest thing that was most enjoyable about the project was actually the early stages of working with and doing the stakeholder engagement and running workshops and getting feedback. And mainly because if we'd done this 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the answers would have been quite different to the questions we were asking. If we went to local councils and said, hey, what are you doing about circularity or embodied emissions and what are some of the things you're doing, they would have been in very early stages of we're thinking about it. Whereas now we've done projects, we're doing life cycle assessments, we're doing embodied emission analyses, we're trying to find the right answer. And that was across state government as well. So when we're actually engaging with them, there was usually a champion within state government agencies that was trying to make a difference. And that was the most refreshing part. Some of the surprises that came out of it, I guess, when we went through the process of developing the plan, it almost became the plan became irrelevant to a point, although it's a 46-page plan with case studies and research and engagement outcomes in there. Probably the biggest thing that came out of it was the fact that we actually got the conversation started. And I'm hoping that that's what this plan can do. And even if someone can take a couple of the actions and say, yep, we're going to do something with that, or someone in SA government also, yep, it's all on you. No.
Boo!
no.
Don't do that. No, sorry.
I think even if just a couple actions get progressed where we can get some outcomes, I think that'd be fantastic. All right, my question's about timber. And I'm gonna answer it.
It would have been awkward if it was PPC.
Yeah. Just, hang on, we're sitting in the wrong spot. Actually, I kind of want to pose a potential answer and then see what you think about it. So we've heard about timber, we've heard about the benefits of what it can do, and we've seen projects happening interstate, and we're seeing timber being used, CLT, glue laminated, whatever it is. My question is supposed to be, what do we need to make it happen?
Yep.
Do you think it should be mandated for SA government to actually each agency build a CLT project in some way?
Look, I get very nervous when governments mandate things because that rarely ends up particularly well. I mean, open disclosure to start with, we have been very lucky to have benefited from some manufacturing type grants. So I'd just like to acknowledge government help with that. Some of these long-term generational investments are very hard to get enough IRR to get it past the board without a little bit of help from outside. So I'd like to appreciate that. In terms of getting more timber into the built environment, it's important to keep in mind that we don't actually have enough timber. So Australia imports, a quarter of the structural timber we use. So we're not about trying to jam timber into every building we can in any which way that's possible. What we're about, and what I think I'd like to see government enable, is to use timber in the most efficient way as part of the built environment. So there's no point building a mass timber building where a stick timber building will do, because stick timber is a very efficient way of building a house or even a 2-3 story building in Australia. So it makes a lot of sense to do that. Now, government can enable that through a range of ways. government bodies do things like put out ratings tools. It's a bugbear of mine that these rating tools never seem to want to include biogenic carbon. The neighbours one is going to have it as a little kind of a graph alongside the actual rating, so that's a pretty good start. I think I'd just like to see that those things are, you know, done in a way that's scientifically transparent and gives us the outcome that we need. I mean, I think there's, you know, the pushback is always, well, what happens at the end of life? Well, the end of life of this building is going to be in 50 or 100 years. We'll all be cooked by then if we don't, you know, if we don't do something in the first couple of decades. So let's focus on doing that. But probably the big thing is we need more trees. You know, it's crazy when you think about the landmass that is Australia and the relatively tiny population that we can't be self-sustaining in wood fibre. Yeah, completely crazy. So that's probably the biggest thing the government can enable, because it's very hard as a pure plantation investment company to justify that investment in buying up freehold land and putting a bunch of trees in when you've got a range of other economic uses for that land.
Can I add something? Sorry.
Please
But can I
do.
just add something to, I think, to the biogenic carbon question? And that is that it should be as simple as what you're saying, and in many ways that it is, and Neighbours they do have that graph, and the work that GBCA has been doing is very aligned with Neighbours, so that it's not confusing to the market, and we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. The issue is with offsets, because people are using offsets. Then they're also claiming biogenic carbon, but that might have already been sold on as offsets somewhere else. So it's really about the accounting of things, which is immature at this stage. So we're trying to make sure, as an industry and as organisations that are trying to oversee a progression in this, that at least it's fair, because the carbon offsets in this country have been a bit of a balls up for the moment. And until we get it right, until there's a proper way of accounting it, I think that it is inadequate. But there is a reason behind it.
Yep.
But, you know, my opinion is that biogenic carbon should be included. We've just got to make sure that it's not being double counted.
And this is where we all invite you to be part of the conversation as well, because their vocal cords are well lubricated now, isn't it? Yeah.
Good.
Yes, Ken.
But before I take the first question, I'm going to switch things up on Trevor as well. Now you have two people that have not prepared you sufficiently on questions and things like that. But do you have a question for anyone on the panel?
Not so much a question. I've just got a comment regarding the carpet. I need to recarpet my house at some point. My kids are still quite small, and I've got faded pink
I know
carpet,
people,
so
I
it's
can help.
perfect.
I know some people.
Um,
You're acting like the Don.
But I think it's, it illustrated to me, you need to bring this life cycle mindset thinking to everything you do. I mean, I was thinking, we should put in a natural fibre carpet because that's probably going to be cleaner for the air and blah, blah, blah. But then, when you think about it, well, what do sheep do? Roam around the countryside, farting and so forth. And then the fiber's going to have to be cleaned, I guess, and all those sorts of things. The best circular economy is one where you take back what you put out and you turn it back into what you put out in the first place, and that's amazing if you can achieve that. So I mean, the timber industry has we have a fair way to go down that path. There are some positive moves. There's a big panel manufacturer now that's got a separate business that's bringing in timber offcuts and timber waste, demolition waste, and turning it back into particle board. So that's a really good start. But I guess as thinking outside the industry, I just think in our day-to-day lives, it's good to take a step back and have a think about those decisions.
I think that means when Dave was like, "Come ask me about wool,"
Yeah.
you are actually like, "Tell us about the wool," and then someone look at me for a question while Dave is giving us some insight on the wool.
Well, sheep in the environment when they're being farmed are not great for carbon. I always say, and I'm not one of those people that say, how do you know a vegetarian? They'll tell you, yes, I am. But if you want to make an immediate impact, stop eating meat. So we always trade off with ourselves. Hey, I went for a run this morning. I had a burger tonight. I think the one is, yeah, animal farming, not great environmentally, but wool processing, wow. Chemical treatment, stripping lanolin out of natural fiber, huge chemical treatment. And then you have to spray it with a pesticide because there is a little thing called a carpet beetle that eats your carpet. So you've got something that's been bad for the environment from a carbon perspective, that's bad from a processing point of view, and yes, eventually it'll biodegrade in landfill, but with all of that stuff in it, pesticides and dye stuffs and pre-metallized dye and acid dye, just terrible stuff. Don't always assume that natural is better. Don't always assume that natural is better. It's not. It's not.
Mhm.
And I think these are beautiful.
And
I mean, I think
and
there's
this
a
is where
beautiful
we can
future.
also have a conversation. You don't have to look at me to be able to step
Yeah,
in.
no, I was gonna say it's funny we talk about this, and I've learned things today being here as well. But it's like a lot of this I think comes down to that clarity in education, and unfortunately, talking to just one person or one supplier and stuff, you'll get usually a one-side response, or there's an agenda that comes with it a lot of time. Whether it's a builder, whether it's a supplier, whether it's an architect and trying to do something like. I guess events like this and others and other parties involved to try and get that information out there and get that clarity. I've said to a few people, I've had clients where we've tried to push investigating doing cross-laminated timber and getting stuff, but the education quite isn't there for everyone to go, this is the clear path of how you do it. What is involved? This is a clear path, like somebody will stop you somewhere, because whether it's from a QS saying it's too expensive to an engineer saying it's too hard to do, or a certified saying something, then it just becomes too hard. And once it becomes too hard, everyone goes back to what they know. And what they know from what we should know by now is that's not always best. And we're learning from our mistakes. I guess that's the only way we learn, is we make mistakes and we move forward. So it's good to, I think, have events like this and have talks and really get that education, and that if you want to push something or if you want to try something new, it's just asking questions. And unfortunately, that time is what it is, the consequence at the moment, the time and money just at the moment to get us there. And that will never disappear, but it should get easier. So hopefully we learn and move forward.
Yeah.
And I think to that exactly, James, is that one size doesn't fit all.
Mm.
So we really have with the Industrial Revolution, I feel like we've all want everything to be the same size and the same shape and the same answer because it's easier, but it's not like that. And trying to so we've got this framework, or these guidelines that we're trying to set, which work really well for steel and concrete and carpet, and because they're mostly single, or they're very simple composition. Once we get to multi-components and furniture, trying to get transparency through the supply chain.
Facades.
Facades, systems, HVAC, it doesn't work. Things fall apart. You can't apply the same rules across the board. So if we can ask those questions and ask them quickly and try to work together so that everyone can share the lessons learned and the good, bad, and the ugly, and especially the ugly, because that gets us further, then that's where we want to be. And that's, directories are really helpful for that, because a lot of those questions have been answered for you. You still need to ask the questions. You still need to be sure that, as Dave said, that if you're looking at a product certification scheme, look under the hood, make sure that it does what you need it to do. A lot of them work really well for one thing. It might be circularity, it might be transparency, it might be that it's measuring carbon really well, but you really want to ensure that everything is more holistic, and you want to make sure that you're not doing damage in some dark corner of the universe just because you're focusing over here.
And as we were talking about questions and dark parts of the universe, we have a question over there in the back.
I'm Sally, you're from a company called Fixbit ANZ. And
You were given a shout out earlier today, by the way. So this is Sally, everyone. Yeah. All right, question time.
okay, question time. I have so many and have so many comments because now we've touched on a number of things. Talked about now, so just the just conversation was just raised, but also let me just start with one question and we can always chat after. But the one question around certification is exactly that. At the moment, the circular economy framework and roadmap is being developed for Australia. 2025, the government's looking at putting national legislation on the table for circular economy. Like, I mean, one of you said you get a bit nervous when government mandates things. I'm with you on that, but I think so this is our time now to really start pulling together and working together and collaborating on what we think should go into this document. Coming back to certification, because that came up in the conversation this week. However, certification is for only certain bands. So how do we make it more accessible? And I think Dave mentioned that earlier, to more people so we can have a more level playing field. And is that maybe where government could potentially step in? There are lots of grants around it. There are funding mechanisms often for hardcore capital plant-based projects. But could there be some support for assisting with getting the certifications across the line? And which certifications should they be? Or which metrics should we be using, especially from a circularity perspective, and thinking more in a systematic way?
Awesome. Thank you, Sally. I'm going to extract 2 questions out of that. So appreciate that. But Jacob, if you don't mind, I'm just going to pull you in a little bit here because through the consultation, you were mentioning that there is a lot around people are talking about policy or incentives and things like that. Is there anything anything you can comment on that? And I'm pretty sure Dave and Catherine, you could probably say some things as well.
I think some of the key things that we got out of it was that you mentioned the major upgrades to like large manufacturing, big industries there. There's not much happening in the SME, small to medium business space around getting these small suppliers that have those boutique options off the ground and telling them, oh, well, you need an EPD or a declare or a cradle certificate. Not a chance. So I think that is the bit that's missing at the moment is the SME space. And if we can get a grant program in place that helps them go through this process, fantastic outcome.
Well, you can have a look at the Green Industries website. There's a number of grant programs, and we have their business sustainability team that support that and give a lot of support throughout the process. It's not just you apply and then you're left on your own. So do have a look. There's a number of different projects with support development of the EPD, I think was.
Yes, yeah. So you've helped a number of businesses go through this already.
And focusing on SMEs. So
yes,
but it could always be expanded.
I was talking nationally, but not targeting SA.
But if anyone's interested,
Yes. Indeed. Anything you wanted to add to sort of policy stick carrot kind of discussion?
No, I think Jacob's absolutely right. It's I think that third-party verification is very important. I was discussing with Green Industries SA today that only 31% of claims are supported by documentation. So, and 47% of Australians would stop backing an organisation that doesn't have that is practiced greenwashing. So greenwashing is rampant. So I really feel that there is value in third-party certification. I hear that it's expensive. I think it's a very good thing to invest in. I also think Trevor was talking about EPDs. They're very expensive, but just as he said, we've got Australasian EPD Australasia and the EN 15804, which certifies those EPDs. So it means that it's not bullshit. It's just, we know what we're doing. And as we need to move faster, we need to ensure that the data that we're using now, the metrics that we have are aligned, the language that we use, not just state by state, but also internationally, it's a common language, because otherwise we're going to be running around in circles in 5 or 10 years anyway.
For sure. We got a question over here?
It was really just
or comment.
A comment, really, essentially. Like with the Department of Health, we've got a capital budget going for 5.2 billion over the next 8 years. I think where government can really help is being able to create the demand to justify you getting and some certainty around the the criteria and the benefit you'll get through doing that. And in a way, so the embodied carbon market is becoming quite mature. Suddenly there are EPDs out there, there are tools to measure this. And I think what's really hard is for maybe, unless it's just the carbon dioxide associated with carbon, I don't know how we specify into our projects at the moment a way that will create that demand. And what I'm reflecting on there is a report that the WWF did with the New South Wales government. And I think their number one thought, and this was around how do we basically green the supply chain. And their number one finding was the use of state government, not general government, state government demand with a scale that could start to move industry. And I know working for state government, seems a lot of goodwill, probably a lack of capacity at our end, how to specify this to create this dynamic. So we're all up to being educated on how to do that.
And I really appreciate like the comments and also context from both of you, Rob and also Sally, because it's another thing that we acknowledge when we have these yarns is that our community, we're kind of like a community of practice, right? So all of you in this room have perspectives that will be very useful for us to know as well. So don't feel bad about contributing to this conversation, not just about asking questions, unless you carry on for 5 minutes and I'll cut you off. But thank you so much. Was there anything from Rob's comment? Then yes, please.
Sorry. So that's the guidelines that we're developing. We're hoping will be useful as procurement guidelines for government and for corporates, because just as I said before, focusing over here means that there's a thousand things happening behind you. If we're able to look cohesively at what a responsible product is, then we're half the way there. Creating the demand for good products is brilliant, and it is the way forward. And this is going to sound a lot like a plug, and it probably is, but I don't mean it to be necessarily.
Just do it.
The responsible product guidelines that we're developing, we're aligning so that there's a common language. And so that common language means that we're aligned on circularity, we're aligned on responsible, so those high-level carbon commitment statements, we're aligned on modern slavery, and healthy, sort of what a healthy product means. So that's things like modern slavery, VOCs, occupants' health and safety, and manufacturing health and safety, and positive. So that's carbon, so energy source, energy use, and water. And these are working. We're starting to work internationally with our counterparts to ensure that we're not just working with small suppliers, we're working with big suppliers, so that we're able to start driving that demand, and that it's not piecemeal anymore, that if we're not demanding the exact same thing, it's in the same ballpark. So we are hoping that will be useful for your procurement strategies, for specifying, to have a band that you can specify within, and to point back to a document which has been agreed on by industry. So I feel free to call me and talk more about it.
To expand on that plug, will it be accessible only through Green Star accredited professionals, or
at the moment it's going to be for Green Star projects?
Yep.
It is being pushed. We're pushing as hard as we can to make it as accessible as possible, as quickly as possible. But it will be in the next few years. It will be accessible to the consumer market.
Yeah.
So I'm
because we
really
need to do
hoping
test runs and things like that too. Yeah.
Well, we need to make sure that from the Green Building Council's point of view, that that our members are seeing that we're testing it on projects, and that we're bringing in our we've got a number of roundtables. We've got Responsible Products Advisory Group, the roundtable. We've got the Green Star Advisory. We've got a whole bunch of governance that needs to be pushed through, and it's heavily moderated and guarded within those processes to make sure that we're not being either too stringent or too lax. So it's setting out that, and then also setting out a roadmap, which is next.
Fantastic. Oh, fantastic. I don't have to ask a question. So let's just go from the left of the room over to the right. So it's like a good band right there.
You're going to regret
Trios.
My question is actually to you. I mean, there was a question about the Department of Health, circularity, sustainability, land lease. I mean,
Whoa, 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 whoa.
how are you feeling about what you're contributing at the moment in that space?
That is a very good question. Now, who would like to? No, that is a very fair question, and I think the other reality of being in quite a large. Um, I joked at our Green Building Day in Adelaide that I worked for a boutique developer. But the reality is that with the pool that Lendlease has in the marketplace, we actually have to pivot on how we not only specify but also the rigor behind us reviewing materials. Now, the benefit that Lendlease has as a very large organization is that we do have many um, I guess, checkpoints along the development path, whether it's from early design to signing off on that design to go with a contractor, whether that's, Lend-Lease development to Lend-Lease or from, Lend-Lease development to another head contractor. So that's kind of worked out in the specification sort of side. But then when it flips into a design and construct package, everything gets thrown out of the window again, right? It has to be all reviewed once again. But again, there's a checks all the way through, because if it doesn't align with our own commitments, which are basically by 2040, we're trying to basically negate our whole supply chain's carbon emissions. So it does become, how do we elevate the use of manufacturers that are much more transparent in their supply chain, allows us to make calculations on embodied carbon, so on and so forth. For instance, we've been, I can't say what project, but we have a project being constructed right now that at every single package that is being tendered, we are actually reviewing the embodied carbon impact against a reference case. So that reference case was, we used the Green Building Council of Australia's, the GBCA's technical guideline. We built up a reference case, and then we're actually tracking not only through design optimization, how much that's saved, but also through every single package. Now, that as a workflow is not very common, but we are actually practicing it right now in anticipation for 15 years down the line. So we're hoping that that becomes a little bit more commonplace. I will admit that it's not across every single project at the moment, but being able to have flagship projects that we're able to do that is really fantastic. But I'd also pan sort of to our panel on that question as well. It's sort of like, where do we actually see, like through design or as you're interacting with specifiers and things like that, are there questions coming down pipeline around how do we actually think about circularity, embodied carbon of the materials that we specify or design with?
If I jump in quickly and I'll just do a quick, I think it's definitely growing in that, like I said, if there was some things I could do differently from what I did 5 years ago, that definitely has changed. And I think products that we have in the building now, some may stay, some may change. And I think from a design point of view, sometimes it's hard because we fight the sustainability, best practice, ticks all the boxes versus something that looks real pretty sometimes. And that's can be as basic
And
as
time
that.
and budget.
And time and budget. And then sometimes that, you got to balance it out. And I think we can look back and go, okay, we're not always going to tick every single box. And maybe, again, that's that holistic approach is sometimes there may have to be a little bit of give and take that, we don't, sometimes there has to be something a little bit more special in something, for a reason. But that also has potentially other benefits from social, from the environmental, in space and health that maybe, okay, with that material took a little bit longer, got here, had to come from somewhere else, ideally didn't need to. but did it. Now, I'm not saying that means every product you're going to start getting imported terrazzo from something, and that's just the way to go. But we got to look at everything. When we look at talking to contractors and stuff, I think the pivot to Lend-Lease being just selected here. I guess going back a few years, I wouldn't have thought about Lend-Lease driving that as much. Now that can be, again, just from education from knowing Lend-Lease, but then knowing you can a little bit longer now and hearing you talk, it's like, I don't think someone like Lend-Lease would bring you on board if they weren't actually committed to doing this, and you wouldn't be there if you didn't think that was actually going to be authentic.
No pressure.
Trevor, did you want to add anything to that?
Oh,
Like, because I'm pretty sure you guys are getting lots of questions around that as well.
Yeah, I just think at a pragmatic level, what you've described is Lend-Lease's way of providing leadership in the space to the industry, and we try and do the same in our industry. So we do that in a few ways. I'm not sure if you do the same, but there's various industry bodies. So we work with those industry bodies because we recognise in our manufacturing industry anyway, there's stacks of SMEs. There's no way they're all, as you said, there's no way they're all going to be able to do EPDs or all the rest of it. So there's an industry EPD, and then if you want to differentiate yourself because you're bigger and you've got the funds and you think it's going to be better, you do your own product EPD as well. So maybe we can bring that model along where there's a basic deemed to satisfy, and then there's a performance-based solution for those that can go to that space.
That's my only concern is, if you put this framework in place, the businesses and manufacturers that can meet those requirements might be on the larger end of town. And then that means when we're doing economic development programs and we're trying to get new suppliers in the mix, how do you make sure this is a question for everyone maybe, how do you make sure you don't knock out those little guys that could provide the exact same outcome but don't have ISO standards, don't have qualifications that tick all the boxes? Is that on your minds?
It's on mine.
Yeah,
It absolutely is.
How
But
many times do you see a big program get announced and, Lend-Lease or a tier one contractor wins it, and they've got their set contractors who meet the requirements, have ticked all the boxes, and then they've locked out all the other players potentially?
And that's actually, so this has come up. It is actually a common theme when we talk around like how is industry actually kind of changing. And again, sorry that my voice will take up a couple of other minutes, but I guess the other thing that we need to realize is, let's just say for any major projects, the subcontractors there end up getting a lot of SMEs on board as well into those projects. Now, is there a flashpoint where like, oh, I don't know how to reckon with this, but I do have to reckon with it because I want to get on this project, which is, it's like a 5-year project, and I want to make sure that we're on board to be able to, make sure that we have income and all those other kind of things. That's kind of like a step change opportunity, because the other reality about large projects, especially in Australia, is that most of the time one subcontractor can't service it all. So then they dig into their thing around like, okay, we know this bricklayer and that bricklayer and that one's smaller, but we got to coordinate between them, and then they're going to get some learnings out of it. From a supplier kind of standpoint, it does, if we actually push to the suppliers that they have to improve, I would guarantee that cement that's going to a tier 1 is also going to a tier 2 and a tier 3 builder. So that becomes a flashpoint. Now, will it work for everything? No. And that's where we need to kind of see where the opportunities in between the different scales, because as we saw even in our engagement across developing the action plan, when we looked at the difference between residential and commercial, that becomes quite a big gap, and then it becomes, how do we make sure that there is some flow between what's being instituted at the commercial level that can flow into resi?
Yeah, that was a mammoth gap.
It was a really big gap, and that's just acknowledging to everyone that it's greatly acknowledged all across the industry that there are some really good things that we wish we could scale and implement on a residential scale, but the sweet spot's not there. But we have to acknowledge and see where we can find those gaps. Now,
Can I just chip in something?
Yes, please.
If you've got a really big project, you want someone from the big end of town involved, because if things go wrong, you've got to be able to finance it. A lifetime warranty. I know with Mr. Buffett's money, we'll be around in 15 years if the stuff hits the fan. You look through the whole supply chain, because we don't install, we're just a manufacturer. The SME component of what we do, mom and pop businesses that are installers, and that along with that comes skills training. And then there's afterlife as well, what happens during maintenance phases. So I think the whole supply chain needs to be looked at rather than just isolation of, hey, you're the big beast, you get all the work. We fund that and we hold it a lifetime warranty. So you want me around in 20 years' time. But what we want is to upskill that labour, because there's not a whole lot of folk coming out of school going, I want to be a flooring installer. They're all my age and older, and it's not 35. So we've got to find ways to bring that up, and we can only do that with those bigger projects and creating demand for a whole new skill set. And then again, I think through certification schemes is make sure you're measuring and holding us accountable and every supplier accountable for their supply chain, so that everything that I'm doing upstream, from raw materials to supporting SMEs in other countries and in this country with procurement and with skills and with labour, I think it's a bigger picture than just the big beast.
One thing that I do want to acknowledge is Trevor has told me he has a hard 7 o'clock. So I got a quick question for all of you. There's a couple of more questions here. I feel like we're getting quite energized on a conversation. But if we say, thank you, Trevor, have a nice flight, we'll see you again, and we want to do more timber, but we kind of keep on chatting, is that all right? Are you guys okay?
Perfect.
Are y'all okay with that?
That was
thank you,
on the
guys.
dot,
Alright, Trevor.
7.
Yes!
Thank you.
Now, I do also understand if any of y'all would like to make moves as well, but again, if you stay for another 5 to 10 minutes, you can really dig into the food again. You had a question up here?
I did have a question that was going to first be prefaced by around reuse, and first be prefaced by a comment that we correct by Ken about plugging government mandating. We've seen that can be really effective in SA, and the government's not scared of doing that. And I think the single plastics ban is a really good example of that. It's not necessarily in this industry grouping, but for example, for a workshop with the Department of Health recently, we were looking at making some purchases of things that will be banned, including plastic cups and straws and cotton buds with plastic in them. And you cannot buy those things in Woolies, Coles, or 3 other pharmacies yet, and that's not coming into effect until September 2024. So, or sorry, 2023. So we can see that that's already working 6 months ahead of the deadline. So it's just a little example of where government mandates can work to institute supply chain change from the top down. So we shouldn't, I guess, remove that as a policy lever. And then my other question was about, I guess, reuse, and I wanted to tag it at Trevor, and as well as also Greg. But just, I guess, thinking about that long term, we do have to sprint to keep the running analogy going. We need to think about the recovery run as well, and we've got where we are today by not thinking about 50 years on, what are we going to do with that building, what are we going to do with that piece of timber. So I guess that was the wood one, but also you talked a lot about recycling processes for the carpets, but are there reuse schemes in place as well?
Oh, very, very much so. And there are several throughout Australia. They're semi-successful because not a whole lot of folk want second-hand floor covering. But sustainability pyramid, which is always the preferences for reuse. I think there are some great organisations. There's a company in Melbourne called Egan's who does a lot of recovery. He's got a lot of carpet back. I enjoy that because you get a view of the second life, because eventually it is going to die. But he's also sitting on about 11,000 square meters. It's been lying there for a long time because folk don't want it, and eventually there becomes a tipping point. So I think there's a really good balance. We've been successful with reuse through our own initiatives, where we've taken competitor product back and actually found a reuse rather than send it back. Huia Atkinson, who's with GHD in Perth, had a great comment at Green Building Day a couple of weeks ago. She said, when I move house, I take my stuff with me. I don't chuck it all out and start again. And I think we need to start applying a little bit of that in commercial space. as well. I think we waste reuse opportunities, and like shamefully, we moved office in Melbourne, and I wanted everything out of Egan's. I said, let's take everything as reuse, but I had a boss who went, no, this is a fresh start. We're buying new gear, and we were that company, and we gave all of our chairs to Egan's and everything to Egan's, and made it his problem. I think there's got to be a good balance. I think there's got to be a good balance. I'd love to see more reuse. I really would, but not a great market for it. There's a lot of stuff lying around that's become someone else's problem. It exists. So I'm answering your question. It does exist. I wish there was more of it because it extends the life and it gives me that. It's still, if I've got a formal process or anyone, and furniture is really good in this. If you get a view of the second life, at least you know when it's coming back. So it just extends that passport a little longer. So
I can do a shout out to Beacons as well. So we just moved office. We've used them to fit out our office with secondhand chairs, secondhand tables. Pretty much, I'm trying to think of what we bought new other than a screen. Yeah, most of the office was fit out with secondhand furniture. Some of it is brand new with a tag on it.
Yeah.
That's the incredible bit. And I hate to think how many SA government agencies do this as well, where they move office and it all just goes. It's not just, small, it's big, it's everywhere.
We take clients on tours of Egan's, and every time I tell my wife I'm going to Egan's, she goes, "Don't come home with anything," because boy, I've got mini bar fridges and sofas and chairs.
There we go.
And, oh man.
Yeah. And what about the designer's perspective on
Yeah, if I was
reusing
something
secondhand
that,
materials?
yeah, secondhand materials, I guess it's, we've done a few fit outs now where that is becoming more common, and whether client depending in how it's driven, whether it's money value that they're trying to save, or they are open to reuse is one thing. I think there's some ISO 19560 or something, and we're looking at kind of models, digital models, kind of reflecting the physical environment and putting all the data into that to know what we're doing, and the information are part of it. So that's something we're looking to in the office as well. And I think that side might be government driven, where if we're doing government buildings and we're handing over information, working with contractors of saying, this is everything we're putting in the building, and let's actually tag this and know what's in there. So in 50 years, if we are demolishing, deconstructing, we know what's there. Going from Egan's, it's like having a shopping list. If you know that building is coming down in 10 years or 2 years, and you're like, well, we're looking at building, we can check it out, the quality is there, can we use that straight away? Like, it's time and money again. That's just going to take a bit of time to educate. We're still in the infant stage of it. But if we really can go, well, we know that even that facade's coming down, but that's perfect facade, could be reused on a building. Not saying that's going to work every time, but there's got to be a point where we can reuse some of it, and some of it's better than none of it. And then so doing from furnishings and linings, it's a simpler way, but I reckon we can even go further. And steel's probably already there to a point, like, people are looking at bits and pieces. So government mandating maybe in the future just to look at more at that is, I can think, is only a positive. I'm sure there's more work. Time and money to pay for it and understand it also has to be appreciated as well. It's people's time and effort and education in it, from designers, from constructors, is worth something. So we do have to acknowledge there is a dollar value now that needs to be paid, but it'll only pay us back in the country and the world long term.
I guess that links to the valuing the material in its first place, which is that continual problem. So we're working on a project in Northern Territory at the moment where it's really hard to get materials. It's expensive, it takes a lot to get it up there, and everything is being reused. They're demoing a building, but they're pulling everything out. Air conditioners are going to other sites. Windows are being used on different things. Roof sheeting's being used for fences down the road because they're like, oh, we need a new fence down the road. It's like, yep, I agree there does need to be that digital twin and technology space, but then at the same time, we know how to share materials. Yeah, we should just be doing it.
Just on sharing, I'm pretty sure we could continue to share all throughout the night, and but I'm just reading the room, and
we're losing people,
and we're gonna wrap it up here. So apologies for any other burning questions, but of course you never walk away from a stage without last remarks. So there's 4 of y'all. What kind of last remarks would you like to leave the fantastic citizens of Adelaide with?
I think you should go first, Jacob.
No, I think I've made my comment. But I think about it. Yeah.
Start at home.
Yeah.
Start at home. Do the right thing at home. And I always ask, in an environment like this, we have so much control in the built environment commercially when we've got clients, when we've got structure, and we'll all step out and jump into a V8 Range Rover. Alexa, turn on my heating. Go home, electric blanket, run the water.
I'm sorry, the impact you can make at work is so much bigger than the impact you can make at home.
Start at
No,
home. Start at work.
No, no, fair comments. And one of the things that I always ask is, we take so much care in the built environment of careful design, careful material selection, great environmental outcomes. When Mr. and Mrs. Jones walk into an office and put their butt in a chair, do they know and do they care? And I think there's a good point for cross intersection of that, so that we carry that to a broader community. So yeah, we have control in the start at work, but we got to carry that a lot broader as well. Make people care when they come to work, and we can only do that if they know why.
Thanks, Dave.
I'll
How about
just start
Marcus?
now. Probably just to start full stop, actually. Like, and even from a design point of view, from working with contractors, is just to start that communication and consultation together. No one knows the answer to everything, and don't expect everyone else to as well. It's just a continual education. We're all getting there, and I think we're getting there. We're getting there faster. It's just it took us so long to get to even the point we're at. So maybe it's, yeah, if I look back at my time from now, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, it's completely different. So I think we're all doing the right thing, and don't punish people if they make a mistake. That's not, you don't have to point them out unless it's maybe completely wrong, but I don't think anyone's doing that. I don't think anyone's just purposely going out and doing it completely wrong. It's just sometimes they're not educated in what the impact is or the understanding of it. So educate if you can.
Be a good human.
Yeah, a good human. I think, okay, there's my answer. Give it a crack. Like, just give it a go. And like, informed go. Don't just give anything a go. I feel like there's a lot of people that are holding back, saying, I don't want to make the wrong decision, or I don't want to choose the wrong thing, and then for 5 years they don't do anything. Yeah. And it's like, well, great, you've just stuck with the same thing. You could have made the mistake, realized what the mistake was, fixed it, done something else in that time, and had a better outcome. This is across private organisations, government, and at home. It's just start having a go. There's my.
Let's finish this off with the greatest amount of wisdom.
I think that there's a lot of wisdom in this room. I think there's a lot of wisdom in most rooms. The only way, so this kind of wraps it all together, is that just talk to each other. It's going to take a little bit extra time, so plan that time up front to have those conversations, understand where it's working well, where it's not working well, and make good decisions based on that. But just ask, because the worst that you're going to do is make a bit of a dick of yourself. But it really doesn't matter long term, because you're going to be making a better decision with better outcomes that have a much longer effect than that 5 minutes of awkwardness. So ask the questions. And honestly, like, again, a GBCA plug, but I'm so happy I love this stuff. Just you are so welcome to get in touch with me and talk about it. I'll talk about it till the cows come home. It really is. It's something that we're all here and we're all passionate about. Just ask and talk to each other.
And you know what I really appreciate about you being on the panel?
I've sworn more than you. Which
Nope. I don't think I actually dropped an F-bomb. Looking at the camera. I have a quota of 3, but you worked in balls up and make a dick of yourself, and that is hilarious because I didn't do it. So thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
Now, with that being said, could you please join me in thanking Catherine, James, Dave, Jacob, and the outline of Trevor in the cushion.